Good evening and welcome to the May workshop for Waseca Public Schools Board of Education. Today is Thursday, May 4th, 2023. It is 5:30 p.m. and we are in the Central Building second floor conference room. So we just have two items on the agenda tonight, beginning with our staff spotlight. And Mr. Hudspeth, I'll let you introduce our staff.
Right, so for continuing in our theme this last few months of getting to all the different departments and some of the different elementary and secondary services we provide for students, talking about what we do and why they're important. We had a chance to hear from music last month, had the opportunity to hear from elementary art this month. So Claire is here to share with us what's happening at Hartley, and then Brandon wasn't able to come this evening, but we'll connect with another time, but we have an opportunity to hear from Hartley here tonight. So I'll give you the floor. Yeah.
All right. Well, I just wrote it all out so that I wouldn't forget anything, but my name is Claire Duncan. I'm the art teacher at Hartley. This is my 7th year teaching, and I've been here in Waseca the whole time. Thanks for inviting me tonight to talk about visual arts. So, although I'm the only one on my team, we have 3 of us, me, Brandon, and Jen, and so our K-12 program is kind of structured with me as foundational skills. Then at WIS, there's a lot more exploration of materials. They get a lot of choice with the projects that they make. And then at the high school, then they choose their class, more of a focus. Like you can take a whole class on drawing, whole class on clay, painting, that sort of thing. Then at my level, I get the sweet little kindies, right? So they're just so excited for life and everything. So I just introduce all the materials and everything's amazing. So, wow, it's a ruler. Yeah, it is. It's the best, right? But I also get the 3rd graders who are kind of the perfect age of still young and innocent, but starting to develop their own voice and choice in their artwork. So I really enjoy getting to know them for the full 4 years. And I think that helps, like, as they have to get a new classroom teacher each year, they know that their specialist teacher is going to be the same, especially at the beginning when there's just a lot of nervousness for kids. Curriculum-wise, focus a lot on just the elements of design, lines, textures, colors. Then I do a few like artist highlights with some culture projects. I know we focus on China a lot. Then I do Aboriginal dot art, throw a little bit of that in there. And then we talk about art that's old and new, how everyone can make art and how art is something different to everyone. I have to give a shout out to Waseca Area Foundation for my kiln. So every single grade level gets 2 or 3 clay projects each year. That's one of their most enticing things they always get to do. And then my behavior system is the art party days. And so that's when I kind of bring in the choice as far as like we do the structured projects and then they earn their free choice day when they can explore. We do PBIS in my classroom, which is a great place for social skills, sharing, respecting supplies, respecting the person sitting next to you. It's just a perfect place to just learn how to be a good human too. You know, this is a color pencil. What happens if it gets broken? Okay, we're just gonna fix that problem. You know, oh, I'm not getting along with the person next to me. Okay, we're gonna stop and take the time to actually work that out because I have the flexibility in my curriculum to do that, right? One of the biggest things I love doing is the collaboration projects. So we're gonna get the big paper out and everyone's gonna make something and we're gonna all put it together. It's working as a team is really important. And then lastly, I collect artworks throughout the art show, and that's for May 16th. So I'd love for all of you to come and see that. And then this year we're combining it with Family Literacy Night, which will be Molly Anderson, our title teacher, and Gwen Kruger, our library teacher. So we're going to do a book fair with the art show and the literacy night. And so we're hoping for like a really good turnout for that. We get to do a free meal. We'll do buy one, get one free book fair. And then all the students have at least 2 or 3 artworks. Everyone's just on a team. They all get the things ready for it. So same as PBIS, literally everyone needs to pull it off. I even pull all the YSLs from the high school. I tell all the teachers, hey, send them to me this whole week. I'm going to need them. So, and then I just want to touch on Mental Health Awareness Month because visual arts is just so important for that. And school is so challenging for so many kids. And the art's the important outlet to have in schools and to keep students thinking outside the box, coping with their emotions, and even do serotonin. So my one research fact is that 20 minutes of art making a day proven to reduce stress. So thank you so much for having me, and any questions that you guys have?
When did you get the kiln?
My second year, after my second year. So
Okay.
third year in 2019.
Okay, my daughter was talking about that this morning because she's a third grader, so.
Oh yes, the cow.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Ah.
And how many kids usually you have in your classes?
Right now we're
Everybody.
split for specials, so it's close to 30 at a time. We're definitely squished in my classroom that I have, so we're looking at schedule options. We always throw out our preferential thing to work for everyone, and if we can't work it out with every single class to come by themselves, then the fifth group has to split because there's only 4 specialists. So my smallest group is about 25, my biggest is 31. So, yeah.
Do you have any help in your room when you have like 31, or is it just?
And don't count on any help. The ones that do come are with their one-on-one students, and
Okay.
just with the reduction of paras and everything, that's been really hard. I did have a full-time para in 2019, right before COVID, and that was amazing, especially to help with the bigger numbers. But just with the more severe needs are happening, it's like really only one-on-one students get help, and then I can't really rely on that for like a curricular helping everybody type person. So had to adjust a few lessons, either based on numbers or just, it's just me. So we can't do anything crazy fun. I shouldn't say that. We still have so much fun, but I have to like filter what we are able to do for the numbers. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then the space that I'm in too, you know, one sink, well, we're gonna have to like, you're gonna get your paint first, and then you're gonna work on this so that you're not all done at the same exact time, because I can't have 30 of you at the sink.
So how
Simple
many,
things. Paper size, like we're so close, I can only work in this size. Yeah.
so how many times a week do you see a student?
We're on a 4-day rotation, so most likely one time. If you have art on Monday and we do have school on Friday, then you get a bonus.
Okay.
But that works out really good too, because if they had art just on Mondays, think of how many Mondays we have off of school.
Yeah.
So that's why we did the color rotation at Hartley,
Okay.
because if they always only had art Mondays, then that one group would be really lacking in their minutes at the end of the year.
So when the students are in art with you, what is the teacher, the normal teacher, or is she in the room with you, or he in the room with you?
That's their prep time. So it's another reason that I have such high numbers with the 5 groups, because then they can all come to specials at the same time, and then the
Okay.
classroom teachers get that common
Okay.
prep time. So we talked the pros and cons of that, and I'm willing to take more of them just because it benefits our whole school that way. So then each classroom gets, or grade level gets that time together.
Okay.
But yeah, it does get a little crazy. So.
So over the course
I don't
of
know,
the-
Dave, you want to come volunteer in art sometime? I've seen you in the basement, but
So over the course of a week, then you see the entire school every 4 days, all students.
yep. And then kindergarten, since they can't really do a 60-minute consistent, they split their time. So every other day they have art and media together, and then they have music PE. So I see kindergarten 2 to 3 times a week. Way better for them. And then first, second, and third, they have the 60-minute block, so we can actually do some like longer sustained attention projects.
So of the different things that you do throughout the year, which one is maybe like the kid's favorite? It might change from year to year, but is there one that
Yeah.
kind of stands out?
They really like the clay, and that's a really good progression too, because when they get to 3rd grade, they finally get to use the glaze, and then they get to eat out of it at home, and that's really exciting. But then they get mad when I have to wait for 2 weeks while I fire it. Otherwise, I've been doing the glow art this month. That was another PTO funded thing. I got black lights with the neon oil pastels, so that's been really good, especially with the May crazy energy. Okay. I'm just trying to focus it, and they've been loving that. So I would say that's my 2 favorites, the neon and the clay.
Is your degree like K through 12, or is it just elementary art?
Yep, it's
K-12.
K-12 art. Yep.
Okay, are there many people going into K through 12 art, like at Mankato or wherever?
I had a student teacher this year, and he said he was only one of 2 at MSU that's doing it. That's doing ed.
One of 2.
Yep. Yep. So upcoming too, just any student teachers, they were struggling to even to fill the slots from MSU this year. So I wouldn't say very many of us. I went to Augustana, Sioux Falls. There was only 5 art ed majors, and that was 7 years ago. So we are kind of rare, but also there's only one of us in every school. So
How do you collaborate then with, I mean, or how do you feel collaboration works between you and the other 2 art teachers in the district?
it's okay, but not the best. They can't really help me that much.
Okay.
Yeah, when I was first starting, Jen came over and she finally saw like the group and she goes, "Whoa." Right? So it's just a totally different world.
Yeah.
So we tried to build our curriculum. Each one of us tries to cover, or at least Brandon and I try to cover all the materials. And then by the time they get to high school, they would choose kind of their focus. But I would still say a lot of kids in high school even just go to ceramics. Same as elementary. It's just so fun, right? Just get messy and build bowls and sculptures. It's such a different type of learning than the regular classroom too.
Yeah.
So I think they all gravitate towards that.
Yeah, I think Miss Pop just posted some ceramic pictures today on Twitter or Facebook or something like that. So clearly,
Yeah.
clearly the talent has been building. So
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Those pinch pots.
yeah.
That's my part.
Any other questions for Ms. Duncan? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in and highlighting what you do. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate how the connection to mental health and how, and explaining how you work with the other specialists and the building as a whole to like make things run the best that they can. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We are an integral part of the whole schedule.
Right.
Right? And
Yeah.
how everything works.
Yeah.
But
Awesome.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon.
Thanks.
All right, well, so next on our agenda, this was one of our board goals that we set last July. I think it was when we set our goals last year. Really to just kind of have some more professional learning, and one of the suggestions was to learn about the curriculum process. And so it kind of came up this time as a good time to work that into fulfilling our goals for the year. And
Right.
thank you, Eric, for suggesting it, and I'll
Sure.
let you.
Absolutely.
Continue.
Well, and thank you for the time tonight, and thank you for your continued attention, especially on such a beautiful evening like this. But, you know, one of the things that we get asked a lot is, why do you teach what you teach, and how do you decide what to teach in schools? And I think there, at times, can be a disconnect, I think, between sometimes in the community on how we think we determine what we're teaching versus what is actually the development process of why we teach what we teach. And so as we come into the end of a school year, we're talking about graduation rates, we're talking about schedules for next year, we're talking about assessment scores. And then, of course, there's quite a bit going on at the legislature right now as they are in conference committee right now, finishing up some of the policy omnibus bills that really could impact some of these things we're talking about right here. And so I wanted to take you through just a few slides, sharing really from the impetus of how standards are created at the state level, all the way through how does that impact what a student has in front of them at one of our buildings. And I won't go into an hour dissertation on it, but I want to give you the highlights of how this is created, so that both as a board member but also community understands that really a lot of this is determined at the state level, at the legislative level, particularly for that. And so when it comes to what teachers teach in the classroom, almost all of it is prescribed by state standards. The only thing that potentially has some curricular discretion by the district would be some of our electives, but for the most part, our core areas, there's not a lot of wiggle room in what we teach. So when I get a phone call about, are you teaching this, or are you teaching that, I don't get to just decide that. It's not in the state standards, we don't do that, period. And I think about some of the conversations we have about CRT, or some of the things we have about equity things, and no, we're not adding things that aren't in state standards. Those things are not in the state standards, they're not in our curriculum, we don't teach them. We teach kids to be good to each other, absolutely. You know, those kind of things, right? But as far as one side or other of opinions. We don't really get into that in our core curriculum. So that's hopefully reassuring to folks that how that process goes. So the state of Minnesota adopts standards. They must be taught in each subject area and in grade level bands. And that is based on, if you remember the old No Child Left Behind Act from the early 2000s. And then one of the things that in order to get that funding, states had to develop these standards. And then they had to assess on them. That's where the MCAs came from. Had to assess on them so that they were able to be held accountable that they're teaching a consistent and viable curriculum. So, Caitlin, if you click on the word standards there, the process is written in state statute. So if I go to here, the Minnesota Department of Ed page, this would be like the math standards page, for example. And if you look down, just scroll down just a tiny bit, where it says math standards are being revised, varying perspectives, third version, the next steps in the rulemaking process. This is all very laid out. So in terms of how the standards are created, there is very little discretion in terms of how the process goes. So if you click then, Caitlin, on the very top blue line where it says current standards 2007 Minnesota, yep, that one right there. And then bring that up as it downloads. And then scroll down to page 3. I'm going to show you. This is what the standards look like in a particular grade level. So for example, this is math, and this is what standards look like. So in the area of numbers and operations, in kindergarten, students need to understand the relationship between quantities and whole numbers up to 31, and so on and so forth. And if you scroll down without giving us vertigo, down to like 3 or 4 pages down, you can see that every grade level then is called out for us. These are the standards the students are responsible for in every grade level. And in math, and every curricular area has their own set of standards. So there's a social studies page like this, there's a science page like this, music, the arts, all the way down for that. So when it comes to what does a second grader have to learn, that's where it comes down to. So when someone says, do you teach X or do you teach Y? If it's not in here, no, that's the answer. Are there some elective areas where kids get to explore and determine some career pathways and they get into senior high? There are, and those are all choice-based, right, where they work on that with them and their family. But otherwise, you'll notice that some of these are similar. Well, then they get into find 10 more or 10 less, round numbers of the nearest 10 and 100. Those are all the things that kids are supposed to learn in those grade levels based on the state standards. If you go back to my presentation, then Caitlin, what I can say is, okay, they're reviewed and updated per the schedule that the state decides. So typically it's every 10-ish years or so. The state will determine to upgrade a set of standards for a particular subject area. Yeah, right here. Yep. And the process is implemented by the Department of Ed and includes feedback opportunities. So they gather lots of feedback from educators, from families, from stakeholders, from community members. Then they send out a draft of the new standards they're proposing, which they get review and comment on. They gather that for several months before they determine what's going to be happening. So for example, most recently the social studies standards, the draft came out, and there was some items on there that people had a lot of questions about. And they gathered those questions, they gathered those comments. They've decided to then delay the implementation of those standards until they could reconcile some of those challenges. So almost never are the standards actually reviewed on the schedule the state wants to have, which makes our curricular setup a little bit more challenging because we thought we were going to get new math standards 3 years ago and we're still waiting for that sort of thing. But at the same time, they determine that the process is implemented and is part of state statute. So if you go to with all your, if you ever need to go to sleep, you go to Minnesota Statute 120B, it talks about all the language about what the process is, who has to be involved, who the stakeholders are. So these standards are not just brought together on whims. There's a pretty intense process through it. This is where most of the, I would say, I call it drama, for lack of a better word, happens, is in the standards process, because this is where it actually comes down to what kids are going to learn. And this is not at the school district level. This is at the state level. And this is where different sides of perspectives of what kids should learn have some challenging conversations, which is what our legislators and our Department of Education have to reconcile. That's why we give our input on what we have. Also in statute is the graduation requirement. So if you click on that page, Caitlin, this is also an indicator of this is what students have to have in order to graduate high school in the state of Minnesota. You know, the math, the science, social studies, you know, there's 7 elective credits, 1 credit in the arts. Working it through there that when we talk to a student who says we're 1 credit short of social studies and I don't want to take social studies, how come I can't graduate high school? You know, this is not a discretionary concept for Waseca Public Schools. This is what the state of Minnesota says you have to have in order to graduate high school. Why that becomes a bigger issue now, and you can click out of there then, Caitlin, but why that becomes a bigger issue now is because one of the things that has happened in the last 2 legislative sessions that are really concerning to me is the state is continuing to want to add more things to those graduation requirements, more classes. So for example, they want you to have civics in 11th or 12th grade, okay? Now, what currently is happening is civics responsible learning is in the standards. So social studies standards include civics, include political science standards, which we have to teach to kids. We are responsible for that in their K-12 experience. So our students are getting it, okay? Some school districts, just by the way that their courses are lined up, which we'll get to that process here in a little bit, students, if they took a particular pathway, might miss some of those standards. So because of that, the legislature has decided they need to mandate a class on it. Well, I think it's just, you should probably follow up and implement what you already have in your standards so that kids can't maneuver their way around it. That's on the district, in my opinion, for that piece too. So my concern is if they want to add standards, if the state of Minnesota through the standard making process, let's take personal finance, for example, which is already part of our standards in some different ways. If they want that to be a specific focus, that's fine, we can work with that, but it doesn't have to be a class. It doesn't have to be a credit, because we don't have to click back on it, but if you think back about that graduation requirement list, every requirement that gets on there is one less elective that a student can take as they get through their high school career. And so we don't want to mandate less opportunities for kids to pick their choices. Do we have to work that into our curriculum somewhere else because it's a standard? Absolutely. So if they want to add more things to our standards, we can work that into our curricular process. But I don't think we need to add more classes, is my personal opinion on that. So if you go to the next one then, Caitlin. So what do we do with the standards? Well, then we develop what we call learning targets, and we look at our curriculum development. So using these standards, we have to review our scope and sequence in each grade level and course. So what Claire was just talking to right there, they have a grade level art PLC. So she maybe wasn't thinking of that in the moment of the question, but their art PLC looks at every grade level, looks at the standards that have to be accomplished in that grade level, and then what are we going to teach and how are we going to get through that in the curriculum for that course. So every math standard, every science standard, we go through our scope and sequence of our K-12 experience for our kids, and we work through it. How do we get to those standards? And we do that by developing what's called learning targets, which are, if I can do this, then I know I can do this, that kind of thing. How do we actually operationalize those standards? And they do that a lot during their professional days. There's some work on that happen once a month, and a lot of summer work. In fact, the majority of our summer professional development dollars are spent with teaching, and our teaching staff is the primary contributor to these processes. And Caitlin, if you click on that curriculum development, this is just one example, okay? Because this, depending on the grade level, looks a little different for each one. And if you go to the Hartley/WIS template, then what you can see there is, here's what we're looking at. Grade and subject, what's the unit, okay? What are our results? What are the essential standards? Students, if you scroll down just a little bit, Caitlin, you can see basically stage 1, stage 2 assessment. How do we know they've learned it? Going through that. And so that's a lot of work, but it's already in place. So now we're in a review process with these things every so often. But so when it comes to, do our staff know the standards? And do we know what kids have to know to be able to show that they've met that standard? That's what that development process looks like. So when you see professional development dollars being spent on summer curriculum writing, That's what that process looks like for that. It's used regularly, even between standard updates, to make sure we're meeting the needs of students. So, for example, we may have a curriculum material, a textbook or whatever, that has now gotten to be 15, 20 years old. We're not just going to buy another one. We're going to go through that whole process to find out what we need, to figure out what meets the standards with it in there, to figure out what the best option is and what units are going to be. When we talk about change readiness and change management, this is where what comes off the plate is just as important as what's going in, because we have to make sure we're continuing to meet the standards that are there, not just what we like as we evolve into new processes. And policies 601, 603, and 604 essentially govern this process for us. If you click on that policy link there, Caitlin, what that just basically is the quick summary of those three policies. You can always refer back to them. But policy 601 is the curriculum and instructional goals process, basically just stating that we'll provide, we provide parameters for the school district, and we will meet the grad standards in federal law. World's best workforce. Obviously, there's a lengthy policy with that. 602 is about the curriculum development. Just we talked about the process. We talk about developing the curriculum as we go through there. That probably the key point there is that our staff, our professionals do that work, and then we bring that to the board when anytime we need input and we have to have a new process or a new material. We bring that to you. And then 604 is the instructional curriculum process, and that's a little bit more talk about our statement of policy that this is all based on law. We'll provide the instruction in those subject areas, working it through there, and development of course offerings for students based on state law and standards with that piece. So those are our policies you're likely familiar with. 606 we'll get to in just a minute, but first, Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind clicking back to the page and going to the next page. So then what do we do? Now we know what we want to teach. We know the curriculum scope and sequence. We know what the standards are. And now we identify appropriate resources to make sure we aid that instruction. And we review and update these on a cyclical basis to make sure that we have the most current materials, as much as we budgetarily can, right, with that piece. The review cycle is kind of there down on the bottom. We identify the needs, we write the curriculum, explore our options, resources. There's multiple curriculum companies in every subject area that would like to sell you their book. So we go through that process to see what the best option is for us, and we monitor and adjust as we go. We do have a process, if you click on that resource request form, that should a teacher or should somebody in one of our buildings feel like they need a different material than what they have the opportunity to request that. It has to go through a principal or director of special education in that case. What's the name of it? What the building will be used for? So we do have the opportunity for our staff, as they feel like they may need something new or additional, to request that. So we're hearing that from our staff. So they have the option to give that feedback. Then if you go back to that policy page, Caitlin. Yep, this one. Then 606 basically talks about textbook and instructional materials. I put a little bit more text on this one because it kind of clarifies what that governance versus how do we process through that. It's a really important part of the curriculum. And so while we as the administration will drive a lot of that selection, we do the work, we vet out all the materials for you, we obviously will bring to the board anytime we have something, like if we're going to switch altogether our math curriculum or update our math curriculum, we'd obviously bring that to the board for your information through that process as part of everything. So, and of course, anytime there is a question about a material, a particular resource, I didn't link it on here, but 606.1 is our policy that talks about what do I do if I don't agree, as a parent or a community member that has an issue with a certain material. We have a procedure and a policy to work through that with everybody as well. So it really is quite clear in policy how we get from standards all the way to what we're seeing in the classroom. And so it's pretty lengthy process, as you can see, and it's something that is just constantly being updated and constantly working in cycles. One of the, and it kind of goes from, we've gone away from the teacher, because I remember as a teacher in the classroom several years ago, it was more me looking at the standards, looking at how I wanted to create my day. We really got a lot more collaborative now, where our grade level teams that are building PLCs are working together to create that scope and sequence. And so, as a superintendent and a school board, through our policy and through our processes, we can feel comfortable. Now, whether or not every student learns it when we hope they learn it, that's a different conversation. But are we creating a curriculum from K-12 with the appropriate resources to meet the state standards? We are, and that's the really fast, 0 to 100 version of how that process looks. But I thought maybe that would be interesting for you all to see and to kind of hear. And if you have any questions about, how do you decide what you teach, then hopefully you have a little bit of that background now through that process. So, and then I would just open it up for any questions or discussion we have from here.
I've got one. This would be mainly at the high school. Our elective courses, do they all have state standards that go along with them too?
Each area does have state standards, yes. Not all of them are part of graduation requirements.
Okay.
Yeah, but everything that we teach, from business to the fine arts, they've all got standards. Some of them are included in the graduation standards, some are not, with that piece.
Because sometimes an elective could cover one of your graduation requirements,
Correct.
right? Okay,
Right.
because it meets whatever standards it needs to.
Yeah. For example, I believe our CTE courses cover our fine arts standards still.
Right, okay,
Which
Or
means,
graduation requirement, I mean.
right.
Yeah.
so the students may have to, here, you have to pick one of these three, because any one of those will meet the requirement, and you could choose.
Correct. What we have to do is be a little cautious of those, like I talked about earlier in the conversation, is we don't want kids to skirt around some of those essential standards if we can. To core content area is a little more critical than our electives, but
Sure.
working through that.
What about exceeding standards? Do we have any of that where they exceed the standard?
Sure, and that would be primarily when you think about at the elementary level up to really junior high, then you're talking it really going deeper into, so it's the same standard but getting deeper into it. So let's take a multiplication standard. If in second grade I'm supposed to do 2-digit multiplication, but I can do 3-digit at that level, I can get into that a little deeper. Go into kind of moving through the process. At the high school level, that's when you get into some of our enriched or AP classes, where then you're starting to take those for college credit or something like that are above in the standards. But you start to go deeper into the standard as opposed to adding more, if you will. No one really wants to just get an extra worksheet because I got done first. So instead you want to do something that's more engaging and goes deeper into the process. Yep.
Are we allowed to add our own standards as a local school district? If we cover all the state standards and we say, well, we think these other two are important, they're just going to be in Waseca,
Yep.
can we do that?
So there's two parts to that question. So the first part is, from a standards perspective, we could, but there would never be an opportunity really to do that because they're so packed. You don't really have a lot of time for anything extra in that process. The second part to that question is we could add, yes, we always have the opportunity to add graduation requirements as a district. So if we feel like this course is really important, you need it to graduate from Waseca Public Schools, but you might not from somewhere else. You have the right to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. When you get into the electives, yes, we're going a little bit above and beyond probably some of what's on the standards list in some of those areas. But otherwise, it's all we can do to cover the standards that are there.
Minnesota has the requirements as you all described. Is most every other state the same way, that it's all state-driven in most of those cases? Or do other states maybe push that down to district level, or is it all state-based?
Well,
Most every state.
it would be all state, it's all state-based. Around 2010, there was something that got a lot of news called Common Core Standards. And Common Core Standards was somebody that the U.S. Department of Education decided if everybody had the same standards, then we all would be somehow much more blissful in our work. And what happened is, like, half the states did it, some of the Some states took just math, but then just not reading. And so essentially that was kind of a flop. Common Core was kind of a flop. And right now still I think there's 17 states that do Common Core. And so that's based on the national recommendation. But the challenge we run into with, and it's a blessing and a curse right at the state level, because when every state is making their own standards, they're also designating their own fate as far as success goes. And the rub has always been a state could design themselves very weak standards, but then they could demonstrate on their assessments that they're doing very, very well. And so, because they still want to compare us with other states in the country. And so let's say we as Minnesotans, this just tends to be our way, whether it's true or not, it's probably up for debate, but we would like to think our standards are as rigorous as anywhere else. But then our performance is what it is. So we don't necessarily look as strong maybe as another state that might have lower standards. But at the same time, we're a big country just like we're a big state. And to say that every state has to have the exact same standards is probably not realistic either. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 in that regard.
When they train teachers like at Mankato State, are they cutting them in on all of this?
To the extent they can. It's more about how do you take what you need to, the planning process, not so much the development process. It's more, here's what you have to cover, here's what you have this amount of time to get it done in, here's how I do it, here's how you get it done. It's more of that process. They're not, at the college level, they're not as engaged in the development of the standards. They're more in the how do you try to fit that in and create a scope and sequence of it. But really, it's led, on our district, it's led by Brooke and the principals, creating that process, getting that going, because very few people in our district, because of the nature of their jobs, really have the K-12 lens of what's going on in the whole district, which is why Brooke's role is so important for us, because they can really, you know, obviously in collaboration with myself and our principals, but to be able to see what's happening, like how come grade 6 and grade 4 are both teaching the same thing? And then you wonder how come we don't have enough time to get to it before the end of the year. So there's some things we can work on that way, which we're doing a great job of, and Brooke does a really good job of leading that. That's made a big difference for us.
Do you think having shifted to the standards-based grading has strengthened our understanding of what state standards are and what we're expected to do at grade level, and
You know,
or do you think it's a wash?
I think it doesn't hurt.
Okay.
It doesn't hurt anything. I think if anything else, it helps our families, in theory, understand what our kids are supposed to know and learn. You know, for a long time, a parent was, my student got a 75%, but a 75% on what wasn't really part of the conversation unless they were sitting doing homework at the kitchen table. You happen to see that. So the advantage of doing standard-based grading is that parents ideally are more informed of what students are learning and doing. I do think, though, that it's a communication, continued communication process for us, though, because at some point, sometimes it is a little bit hard for parents to understand how well they're doing. Like, they're learning this, they're partially proficient. What does that really mean? Help me with that. What does that really mean? And at the secondary level, you know, we do a lot of what's called standard-based assessment, where students are being assessed on the standard. They know, what they don't know, but they still need to get a grade, for many different reasons, you know, whatever that might be for grade point average. So I think more of it is understanding with families what standard-based grading means. I think it doesn't hurt us in understanding our standards ourselves. I was a principal in Albert Lee probably in 2009 or 10, and we were really, the big push was PLCs. The DeFore book had come out, and we're really working on what do students need to learn, how do you know if they learned it, what do we do if they don't, what if they do if they did, and that's not changed. That's continuing to work through that, but I would say for the most part our teachers have a pretty good handle on our standards.
I think even as a parent, when you get the grades in Infinite Campus and it's clearly well, not all teachers, but most teachers, I mean, they're clearly, they're grading you on the standard, even though it's not the 1, 2, 3 like K-6. Just the way that it's worded in the grade book, to me, it's clearly a standard.
And our summer
Yeah.
credit recovery is based on that.
Yeah.
So as we changed, 2 summers ago to, if I failed with a 65%, here are the standards I don't know.
Right.
I learn those standards and I get myself up to a passing grade. I don't have to retake the whole class again.
Yep.
So we are doing quite a bit of standard-based assessment at the high school, but I wouldn't call it grading. I don't know that it's ever appropriate to do standard-based
Right.
grading at the high school. Assessing, yes. which are
But
two
even
different
just
things.
seeing, as a parent, seeing that, yes, we're hitting all these
Absolutely.
standards. I mean, I think that's helpful, so,
Important.
yeah.
What's the relationship between all the state standards and the MCHS? They should be
It's
working together.
yeah.
right?
It-
But do they?
Well, it's depends on who you ask and what day of the week it is, but you're exactly right. In concept, as per the intention, the MCAs should be the state standards for that grade level.
Should be.
It should be, but we have to keep in mind that the MCA is a data experiment on our kids. So they throw in pilot questions that are not tied to standards, but they want to see how kids are going to do, so maybe they should make it a standard the next year. They take questions that everybody got wrong and throws that out of the scoring. There's no way to go above or below grade level. It's you either pass or you fail based on your grade level. The language is a significant concern with the MCAs. The questions are asked very, I would say you can't just ask a kid to multiply 42 times 64. It's going to be if a train's going west at 65 miles per hour and his mother's going this way at that thing, and they're still getting at 42 times 65.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit cynical, but the point is, yes, they are intended to be the state standards, but we also have to remember that they're not really designed, the same way we use other assessments. And so we want to do well on them, we absolutely do, and they're important to our work. But it's one of those weird things where teachers are not even supposed to, based on when they do their training, they're not supposed to be looking at the tests when their kids are taking them. And so you're supposed to prepare a kid for a test that you're never allowed to see. And on a standard that is straightforward, but it's not always asked straightforwardly. So it's, I don't want to necessarily speak too negatively, because I think they have a purpose in testing our system, but they're not always individual student assessment appropriate.
But are some of those reasons why we also do the NWEAs, because of those
Well,
maybe
for us,
help
that's exactly
more
why.
drive it?
Yeah, that's exactly why. Yep. At the end of the day, we as a school district, we need to know what our kids are supposed to learn, what they have to do to graduate, and this is the process how we get there, and Waseca does it very well.
Yep. Yeah, any other questions? Okay. Well, I think that ends our meeting. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. The date is slipping off. May 18th, thank you. May 18th, that'll be our regular meeting. Go out and enjoy the beautiful evening. So,
Yeah.
thank you all.
Very good.